Welcome back. According to Rare Diseases South Africa, hashtag 1 in 15 South Africans are affected by rare diseases. That's the equivalent of one player in every rugby team. Whilst uniquely they may be rare, with more than 7,000 known rare diseases, collectively they are more common than anticipated. At Rare Diseases South Africa, they doing their best to support those 4.1 million South Africans who have been or will be diagnosed with a rare disease or congenital disorder in their lifetime. The mission at Rare Disease South Africa is to ensure a better tomorrow for all those impacted. And joining me, it's a pleasure to welcome the CEO, Kelly du Plessis, to Salam Media. Good morning, Kelly, and welcome to the Mid Morning Talk here on Salam Media.
Well, thanks so much for having me this morning, Miriam. I appreciate it.
So, Kelly, your story and you becoming CEO of this NPO Rare Disease South Africa was as a result of a personal journey whereby your son was diagnosed with a rare disease. So, tell us a little bit about your journey.
So it started off really, I was a very, very young mom. I was 23 at the time of having my first child, and so I really didn't have much idea on what to expect. But within the first couple of weeks, I kind of picked up that he was weaker than other babies, and that kind of thought process just progressed over the months until the point that we got to about him being about 10 months old. And at that stage, he was really failing to make any of his milestones. And it started quite a difficult process of doctor hopping per se. I'd been to doctors who had told me that I was battling with postnatal depression, that I must understand that parenting isn't sometimes what you think it's going to be. And it took us being placed in front of the right doctor at the right time for us to actually get to a diagnosis. And his diagnosis was of Pompe disease, which is a neuromuscular condition. And essentially it affects every muscle from head to toe, from smooth cardiac and epithelial tissue. So at that point, he was really, really quite sick by the time we finally got to his diagnosis. And we were obviously then on a desperate journey to try and get him onto treatment, which had only just become available at the FDA and wasn't available in South Africa yet. And I was simply told that we would never get him on medication because it was too expensive. And I knew that he was going to die if we didn't. So I suppose the fierce mom that's inherent in every mother came out in me. And I'm pleased to report that John's now 12 and a half. And he's been on treatment almost 12 years. July will be 12 years. And he's doing exceptionally well.
So that's what I've made a note in terms of the questions I want to ask you. For me, I think this journey to a diagnosis is stressful and there's a huge financial cost and implication. And also, it takes a mental stress on you, as you've said, because it affects, especially, it's that mother's instinct that there's something that's not right with your child, and then you often get labeled as maybe overbearing, suffering in your case with post-traumatic uh, postpartum depression. Basically, that's what you've said, and some medical doctors just discount you. There's nothing wrong with you, and because they're medical experts, maybe it impacts on the family because maybe. In terms of extended family, like grandparents might be thinking, oh, there's something wrong with this person because even the doctors are saying there's nothing wrong with this child. And also on your marriage, it could impact, especially if the spouse is thinking that now, perceiving that you're reading to a situation or condition that is not there, it's a phantom illness. So it does this journey to diagnosis alone, besides the stress of then finding an appropriate cost effective treatment, and like you say, some are not available. Let's talk about this first journey. I'm sure parents come to you in desperation, in support.
So the average rare disease patient takes, on average, 7.2 years to get to a diagnosis. So that's a grueling process in itself. I suppose we were lucky in the sense that it only took us 11 months. You touched on the financial implications of that. There's a very, very specific caveat to being able to receive reimbursement with a medical aid. And that's having a confirmed diagnosis for you to have an ICD-10 code, which they can ultimately claim back. So generally, the process, that diagnostic odyssey, is paid for out of the pockets of the patient. It's not reimbursed right up until the end, until you've actually got a confirmation. And I think that that's one of the biggest reasons why people don't actually go on to get a confirmation of diagnosis, is because the testing process, and moving from one doctor to the next, is so grueling and so expensive, that you kind of just accept the fact that you would deal with providing symptomatic relief for most of the time for whatever symptoms the patient's dealing with, but you never actually go on to be formally diagnosed. And there's something quite significant about being able to name the beast that you're trying to slay, in terms of knowing exactly what it is. I think it provides parents and the patients with some form of guidance and roadmap into what can be expected from that diagnosis. And as a result, it's really, outside the reimbursement element, it's a very big emotional step to the process of living beyond that diagnosis. So it's relatively, I mean, it's so sad to see how many patients give up on that diagnostic odyssey, or simply just cannot afford to keep going, and as a result remain undiagnosed.
Yeah, you know what? You've put so many things in perspective. I'm just really now trying to delve in trying to empathize in what it must be like. As you say, there's there could be a lot more people that have a red disease, but just because they have not come, I love the word you say odyssey, because it does sound exactly an odyssey. So they probably give up, and as you say, they're getting symptomatic relief, but there are many living without a diagnosis. So the number of people living with rare diseases could be a lot more, because it's just gone undiagnosed there. And then once there's a diagnosis, that's a second part to the journey, because as you say, in your case, it was rare that treatment was just made available in overseas in probably a trial stage. And then also, even if you have medical aid, getting the medical aid to just approve something that is not approved here is a problem. So tell us a little bit more, what is that second part two of the odyssey?
So that only 5% of rare disease patients have a commercial treatment available. By commercial treatments, I mean it's an actual drug. There's a device, there's a surgical intervention. As for the rest, it is only symptomatic care. So in South Africa, we have two problems. The one being access to those innovative products, which is generally what is required, are these new innovative drugs that have become available and are now being brought into the country, are exceptionally expensive. And as a result of their lack of use, meaning that there isn't enough patients using them, you don't have the benefit of bulk procurement. So that ultimately reduces it increases the cost, or it prevents you from being able to be flexible in terms of pricing. And as a result of that, you really battle to get reimbursement, both in the private and as well as the state sector. The other side of this is access to symptomatic relief. So, often people get told that there isn't anything we can do for this patient, and that's not true at all. There is always something that can be done, whether it's improved pain control, making the patients comfortable, getting them in touch with their emotions and helping them deal with their grief. There's always something that can be done. Unfortunately, because the diseases are so rare that we work with, they're not formally recognized within the health system, and it's not like being diagnosed with something that is more common, that is life limiting, where everyone automatically says, okay, we know we need to focus on pain control, emotional stability, etc. in these patients. So we're always continuously having to almost engage the medical, the medical healthcare systems and our doctors, etc., in encouraging them to recognize that we also need those services. So there really is two elements to post-diagnostic treatment. And unfortunately, I think as much as we've tried, I would say that our success rate is very, very low in terms of making sure that patients get access to all of those services as an immediate thing. It's still very much a case of you have to fight for it, and you actually have to make those that are responsible for your care aware of the fact that you are needing access to those tools and services.
I Just hearing from your voice, it sounds like a struggle, and no doubt having now a formal advocacy group and NPO it just makes it a lot more easier for parent going through this, parents going or family going through this. At least now they have the benefit of a support like an organization that's going to advocate, and also you are aware in terms of what legislation is, what can be done, what can't be done in it. So tell me, uh, how is your relationship then with Department of Health? Is it easy? Is there, as well as the medical fraternity? For me, I was speaking to another colleague because uh, she does when children, especially those that can't afford medical interventions, they've been probably bitten by snakes and has a snake bite in the eye and requires surgery, or there was a child that was mauled by a hyena and needed
Yeah.
facial reconstruction. And she was speaking to me in terms of a struggle to get funding in that. And I was telling her, but for me, for doctors that are in this field, this is a way for them to gain experience and understand more. So I mean, for them, it increases their body of knowledge in the medical sphere. So I would think medical specialists would want to take on a case like this because you have somebody here, you can then document the condition, whether treatment is working or not. But from hearing you, that's not often the case where specialists will jump in an opportunity and then gather an interdisciplinary team and say, let's take this as a case study so we can understand more about this disease.
I think that's you're 100% correct. It doesn't happen often, and I think it's because rare diseases pose a significant challenge for the healthcare professionals in the sense that they have to admit that they don't necessarily have all the knowledge and they don't have necessarily all the expertise. And I think that places them in quite a difficult position. As clinicians, you go and you study to be able to save lives, to have a patient in front of you with a condition that is incurable, where the medication is virtually impossible to get because of its cost and all the logistical challenges, with very, very limited prospect, often, of being a cure. So it's a lifelong treatment. I think it must be very, very overwhelming for them. And I think that that's why a lot of the time they do disengage from the process. And being in academic centers, and, you asked about the departments of health, those hospitals, the academic tertiary institutions where doctors are trained, are where the vast majority of knowledge lies. And we are doing everything we can to try ensure that there's multidisciplinary teams that are set up in those sort of areas. And the knowledge base there is great. Unfortunately, as a clinician, you can only do as well as the surrounding tools that you have. If you don't have access to treatments and you don't have access to the interventions that are necessary, the patient ends up dying either way.
Sad reality. And in terms of Department of Health, or let's narrow it down to MECs, various provinces in terms of, because though from the Department of Health is policy, but the actual implementation and putting down comes down to the MSCs, the directors of various subdivisions within the Department of Health, and that. So, how easy has it been to engage with the various stakeholders in the Department of Health?
I think it's gotten easier. When we started off with this, 10 years ago, it wasn't that easy. There was I think a lot of the department was gun shy in the sense that they didn't want to have to engage with advocacy organizations out of the fear of activism. But we have taken a very, very different approach where we want to work with, towards solutions with the departments. It's not a name and shame, situation where we want to identify all the problems and expect them to solve them. We realize that the issues are complex and we want to work towards the department. So that has definitely improved over the years. Do we still think that there's a lot more work that can be done? Absolutely, we do. But I think we've got a good enough relationship now where we are able to raise, and the same goes with the medical schemes, we are able to raise the issues where we feel that they haven't been correct and they haven't done right according to the patients that they aim to serve. And those lines of communication remain open. So, we do have the ability to be able to navigate and try and amend and change and improve the access to services. But we are still plagued with a lot of the issues that, plague the entire healthcare system, and corruption and, misappropriation of funds is one of the biggest challenges, because if there is no budget to be able to fix these problems, nothing we can do as an organization is going to be able to solve the issues. We're not asking for more money to be assigned to treat rare diseases. We're asking for improved procurement from the funds that already exist, making sure that you are buying products and you're buying treatments that show the most amounts of efficacy and that you get the most value for your money. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with these innovative products that are very expensive, as an example, my son's medication has now just hit 500,000 Rand a month. So it's exceptionally expensive. And I always get asked, but we could save so many HIV children with that same budget. Yes, that is 100% correct, but that doesn't make the reality for my son any less real, and it doesn't limit his prospect and his deserved, right towards accessing a treatment as well that is as effective. So it's not about either or. It's about ensuring that we give the right investment to the people that need it the most.
Yes, I like what you said in terms of that prioritizing, but at the same time, for me, it's an investment in learning more about the human condition, about diseases, about ailments, so that if there is any, if it's not a genetic disorder, there's ways that probably you can learn how to prevent this. I don't know, maybe at in your son it was at birth, so maybe during pregnancy something to be aware of, or maybe there's a test that we could do just as we have tests for Down syndromes, maybe like this. For me,
Yes.
it's just that a rare disease opens up an opportunity to learn more about the disease, which is going to benefit not only South African but globally, the world globally. We can share knowledge today. It's so easy to share knowledge with technology has made it a global village. So universities and clinicians can speak to each other on a daily basis or even hourly basis. So we've become a global village, and maybe that's what we can look for. Tell me finally, how does one, if somebody listening out there, I've begin this process where the child is not well, they've been to umpteen specialists, there's not a correct diagnosis being given, or they're trying symptomatic relief, and that how do they contact Rare Disease South Africa, and what type of support does Rare Disease South Africa offer?
So the first place to contact us is definitely our website, which is www.rarediseases.co.za. There's various options on the site, and you'll be able to navigate through to a variety of endpoints. With regards to the services, and I think it's something that you've just touched on, with regards to the genetic predisposition, genetic services in South Africa, unfortunately, they are so under resourced. And it's one of the biggest components, exactly what you were saying about being able to, between appropriate family planning, understanding how these conditions have come about, what you can do to prevent them, etc., is such an important part of the conversation. And unfortunately, our genetic services in South Africa are not actually able to get through the amount of patients that they need to. And it's one of the new programs that we've introduced has been bringing on a genetic counselor to actually help us augment what is not available in the state services. So in terms of support, we do referrals. We do have counselors on board. We obviously do have genetic services that are now available. And for a patient that's out there that's listening that thinks that they may have something rare or has already been diagnosed, I think the most valuable thing that we can give you is a place to call home. It's an opportunity to join an organization who knows what they're talking about because we've lived through it ourselves, but also just having people who you can speak to when you are having a bad day, who understand and who've traveled the same emotional journey, makes your ability to cope so much better. It really helps giving, just knowing that you've got people in your corner who've done it, who can give you practical advice, really helps. We might not be able to change the diagnosis, we might not be able to change the pathology of the disease and how it's going to manifest, but we certainly will be able to give you the emotional tools to be able to go through that journey easier. And that for most patients is already a massive step in the right direction.
Kelly du Plessis, thank you so much for joining us here. And thank you for ending on a positive note that at least there is a shoulder and there is a pillar of support and a shoulder to cry on when you're just feeling frustrated and you know what, you can't see light at the end of the tunnel. What you offer is comfort and support and TLC. And for me, that is essentially what keeps us human. So thanks so much. And I'd like to chat to you maybe in the future, focusing on genetics as well and genetic disorders. But thanks so much. And uh, this is your platform. So if there's anything you'd like to raise in terms of creating awareness, please, Salam Media, your online humanitarian platform, you can call home as well in terms of your advocacy and raising awareness for rare disease South Africa. And please pass my compliments to everybody who's affiliated to this. Uh, we are proud that we have such an organization here in South Africa.
Thank you so very much for the opportunity. We appreciate it.
Okay. May you be under the mercy and the protection of Almighty. We're going to take a short break, and then joining me will be Sister Nadima Noor.